Hi everyone, in this lecture video, we will be talking about impairment of assets under PAS 36 or IAS 36. The lecture video will be subdivided into four parts. Part A, we will going to cover general concept and some illustrative cases for the impairment of assets. Part B, we will going to cover the concepts of cash generating units. Part C, we will focus on the recognition and measurement of goodwill. Part D, we will going to discuss the reversal of impairment loss. Before we start, please take a look at the timestamp below and kindly click the closed caption button for this lecture video. Let us talk about the scope of PAS 36 or IAS 36. The accounting standard will apply to non-current assets such as property, plant, and equipment under PAS 16, intangible assets under PAS 38, investment property measured using cost model in PAS 40, and investment in associates using PAS 28. If you want to know more about those topics, I will post the link below to my detailed discussion. Now that we know the scope of PAS 36 or IAS 36, let us deep dive into its fundamental principle. The standard says that a specific asset is impaired when its recoverable amount is less than its carrying amount. The recoverable amount is the higher between the asset's fair market value less cost of disposal, and we will going to compare it to the value in use. According to the accounting standard, the fair value is the price that would be received to sell an asset or paid to transfer a liability in an orderly transaction between market participants at the measurement date. Cost of disposal is the incremental cost directly attributable to the disposal of the asset or cash generating unit, excluding finance costs and income tax expenses. Example of such costs are legal costs, the cost of removing the assets, and all directly attributable costs to bring an asset into the condition for its sale. Items recognized as liabilities will not be included as cost of disposal, such as termination benefits and reorganization costs. The value in use is the present value of the future cash flows expected to be derived from an asset or cash generating unit. In computing VIU, you need to know the following. First, you need to estimate the future cash inflows and outflows expected from continuing use of the assets and its final disposal. You will include revenues derived from continuing use of the asset, the day-to-day cost, and you should consider any residual value and disposal cost. Lastly, you must apply an appropriate discount rate to those future cash flows. You should take note that the discount rate should be pre-tax and should reflect the current assessments of time value of money. The carrying amount can be computed by subtracting from the initial cost all the accumulated depreciation and accumulated amortization. If you are going to study impairment loss or PAS 36, my advice to you is to refresh yourself with the concept of tangible assets, different depreciation methods, intangible assets, and amortization. With the concept elaborated to you, we can now say that if the carrying amount is equal or less than the recoverable amount, the asset is not impaired. Now that we know the concept of impairment loss, we can now talk about when to assess impairment losses, what is its source are, and how should we recognize and measure impairment losses under PAS 36. Let us discuss the timeline. Assuming that we are using a calendar accounting period, we should be able to assess at the end of each reporting period any indications of impairment. The standard prescribes testing the intangible assets with indefinite useful life and those intangible assets not yet available for use and the goodwill acquired in business combination. There are two sources of information for the indications of impairment. The external indicators will include, first, a significant decline in the asset's market value. Second, a significant changes in the technological, market, economic, or legal environment that adversely affect the recoverable amount of an asset. Third, increase in market interest rate that adversely affect the discount rate used in calculating assets value in use. And lastly, its recoverable amount and if the carrying amount of the entity's net assets exceeds its market capitalization. Internal sources of information include obsolescence or physical damage of an asset, significant changes in the expected use of an asset that adversely affect its recoverable amount, and worse economic performance of an asset. Example of these are discontinued or restructured operations, and inflows from the asset are significantly lower than expected. Impairment loss is recognized immediately in the profit or loss section of the statement of comprehensive income or income statement, unless the asset is carried at a revalued amount, in which case, revaluation is decreased first and any excess is recognized in profit or loss. The decrease in the revaluation surplus is recognized in the other comprehensive income or OCI. The following are the case facts. Requirement, we have to compute for the impairment loss and we have to compute for the revised depreciation after the impairment. The cost of disposal amounting to 60,000, it can be a transaction taxes, it can be legal cost, commission, or other fees alike. Let us have two scenarios. We have a fair market value amounting to 1.2 million and a fair market value amounting to 800,000 for scenarios A and B respectively. In scenario A, it should be observed that there is no value in use in the given. Therefore, we will use the fair market value less cost of disposal of 1.2 million pesos as our recoverable amount. Since the FMVCTD is higher than the carrying amount of 1 million pesos, this will imply that the asset is not impaired. Let us solve for scenario B. We will going to deduct the carrying amount of 1 million pesos from the fair market value less cost of disposal amounting to 740,000. How did we get 740,000? That is coming from the fair market value of 800,000 less cost of disposal of 60,000 pesos. Since the fair market value less cost of disposal or the recoverable amount is lower than the carrying amount, we will going to recognize an impairment loss of 260,000. We will record this by debiting impairment loss of 260,000 pesos and credit accumulated impairment of 260,000 pesos. Because the asset has been impaired, we will revise the annual depreciation by dividing the revised carrying amount after the impairment amounting to 740,000 pesos by the revised remaining useful life of 5 years. The revised annual depreciation is 148,000 pesos. The following are the case facts for illustration number 2. I would like to highlight that future cash flows are in net amount, meaning the cash outflows were deducted from the cash inflows. Since the cash flows are in future value, we must compute their present value. The case facts gave us an even cash flows. That's why we will going to compute the present value factor for each covered period. If you are using a manual calculator, you should divide 1 by 1.1 or 100% plus the discount rate. You will going to get a present value factor of 0.909 for the year 1. Then let's divide it again by 1.1. We will going to have 0.8264 for year 2 and divide it again by 1.1. We will going to get 0.7513 for year 3. If you are using a scientific calculator, we will be using the formula present value is equal to the future value multiplied by 1 plus I raised to negative n. The present value for the year 1, we will going to get 181,800. For the year 2, we will going to get 148,752. For the year 3, 135,234. Then we will going to total all of those numbers to get the value in use amounting to 465,786. Then we will going to compare the value in use to the fair market value less cost of disposal. Our fair market value is 450, then our cost of disposal is 50,000 pesos. We will going to get 400,000 pesos. Since the value in use is higher than the fair market value less cost of disposal, the VIU will be our basis for our recoverable amount. Then we will going to deduct the carrying amount of 600,000 from the recoverable amount. We will going to get impairment loss of 134,214 pesos. Same journal entry will be applied just like with what we did in illustration number 1. The following are the case facts for illustration number 3. The future cost is not yet committed and cost of planned improvement and enhancement of the assets should be excluded, while the cost of day-to-day servicing of the assets are included in the projected cash outflows. Since there are outflows that should not be included as part of cash outflows under PAS 36, we will going to add back the 10,000 pesos and 5,000 pesos because they are related to the uncommitted restructuring and the 5,000 pesos is related to the planned improvement of the asset. But we will going to deduct the 2,000 pesos outflow because that is related to the day-to-day servicing of the assets. After taking into considerations all the adjustment, the adjusted amount for the year 1 is 213,000 pesos. For the year 2 and 3, that is amounting to 193,000 pesos. Then we will going to use the present value factor, just like what we did with illustration number 2. The total value in use is 498,113. Then, we will going to compare it to the fair market value less cost of disposal of 400,000. Then we will going to compare the VIU to the fair market value of 450,000 less 50,000 pesos for the cost of disposal, totaling 400,000. In this case, VIU is higher than the fair market value less cost of disposal. That is why the VIU will be our basis for the recoverable amount. We will going to deduct the 600,000 carrying amount, then we will going to have an impairment loss of 101,887. We will going to have our journal entry, debit impairment loss 101,887, credit accumulated impairment 101,887. The following are the case facts for illustration number 4. Let us try first to illustrate the case facts. It says here that the future net cash flows is 100,000 pesos. We have to take into consideration that a cash outflow of 10,000 pesos related to the income taxes and financing activities has been included as part of the cash flows under PAS 36. According to the standards, these 10,000 pesos should not be included as part of your outflows. That's why we will going to add it back. Then we will have our adjusted cash flows of 110,000 pesos. To illustrate, we have here our number of years. We have 5. And every year, we will going to have 110,000 as part of our cash flows. Then the 20,000 pesos residual value or residual amount will be on the last year of the useful life. For the 100,000 pesos, we will going to get the present value of ordinary annuity. The PV factor that we will going to use here is 3.791. How did we get the present value factor? We will going to use the formula 1 minus the summation of 1 plus 10% raised to negative 5 divided by the 1 plus 10%. That's how you will get the PV factor of 3.791. For the 20,000, we will going to multiply it by 1 plus 10% raised to negative 5, or the present value factor is 0.21. The total value in use is 429,420. Then we have to compare the VIU to the fair market value less cost of disposal, 400,000. Since VIU is higher than the fair market value less cost of disposal, then that will be our basis for our recoverable amount. Then we will going to deduct it to our carrying amount amounting to 600,000. We will going to get impairment loss of 170,580. Let us record that amount by debiting impairment loss 170,580, credit accumulated impairment 170,580. Let us have illustration number 5. The value in use is 780,000. The fair market value is 900,000 and the cost of disposal is 80,000. We can now see that the fair market value less cost of disposal is higher than the VIU. That's why we will going to use the 820,000 as our basis for the recoverable amount. But since the recoverable amount is higher than the carrying amount, then we will not record any impairment loss for this illustration. If you are working out with newly constructed asset, you will going to include the materials, the labor, the direct overhead, and all of the capitalizable borrowing costs. In this case, we will going to sum up 200,000, 450,000, 50,000, 80,000 pesos. The total amount is 780,000 pesos. Then we will going to compare it to the recoverable amount, that is 750,000. The recoverable amount is lower than the carrying amount. That's why the newly constructed asset is impaired. We will going to record the 30,000 pesos by debiting impairment loss, 30,000, and credit accumulated impairment, 30,000 pesos as well. The following are the case facts for illustration number 7. First is that we will going to record the annual depreciation. We will be using the straight line method. The formula for that one is we will get the cost 500,000 less the residual value 50,000 pesos. We will going to have 450,000. That will be our depreciable amount. Then we will going to divide it by the estimated useful life of 10 years. We will going to get 45,000 pesos as our annual depreciation. We will going to record debit depreciation expense 45,000 pesos, credit accumulated depreciation 45,000 pesos. According to the problem, the date of impairment is January 1, 2006. We will going to compare the recoverable amount to its carrying amount. First, for the recoverable amount, let's take a look at the value in use and the fair value less cost of disposal. For the value in use, we will going to use the present value of ordinary annuity to be multiplied to the net cash flows. For the residual value, we will going to multiply it by the present value factor. The total of value in use is 165,325 pesos. We will going to compare it to the fair value less cost of disposal, 140,000 pesos. Since the value in use is higher than the fair market value less cost of disposal, we will going to use the 165,325 as our recoverable amount. Since we will going to depreciate it 45,000 every year, multiplied by 5 years from 2001, 2002, 2003, 2004, and 2005, that is 5 years. Then we will going to get 265,000 pesos. If you will notice, the recoverable amount is lower than the carrying amount. That's why we can say that this asset is impaired. We will going to record an impairment loss of 109,675. Remember that every time a depreciable asset will be impaired, you have to compute for the revised annual depreciation. In this case, our recoverable amount will be our basis. Then we will going to deduct the revised residual value of 10,000 pesos. Then we will going to get the revised depreciable amount amounting to 155,325. Then we will going to divide it by the revised estimated useful life of 4 years. Then our new annual depreciation is 38,381. The following are the case facts for illustration number 8. Since we are using a revaluation model, please take note that any excess, we will not going to record that first to the impairment loss, but if there is a revaluation surplus, we will going to exhaust first those revaluation surplus before recording impairment loss. In this case, the revaluation surplus is 10% of the carrying amount, that will be 80,000 pesos. The fair market value less cost of disposal is 100% lower than the carrying amount. This will be 700,000 pesos. And the value in use is 20,000 pesos lower than the FLCD. So this will be 680,000 pesos. Since the fair market value less cost of disposal is higher than the VIU or the value in use, we will going to use the 700,000 as our recoverable amount. We will going to deduct the carrying amount of 800,000. Then the excess is to be attributed first to the revaluation surplus, but the revaluation surplus is only 80,000 pesos, meaning any excess will be charged to impairment loss. Our journal entry for this transaction is we will going to debit revaluation surplus 80,000 pesos, debit impairment loss 20,000 pesos, and credit accumulated depreciation 100,000 pesos. The following are the case facts for illustration number 9. Since we are working on with intangible assets with indefinite useful life, we will going to use this formula to compute the present value of assets that will have indefinite useful life, and that will be the annual cash flows divided by the discount rate. In this case, our annual cash flows is 10,000 pesos divided by the discount rate of 10%. Then our value in use or our VIU is 100,000. We will going to compare it to the carrying amount amounting to 130,000 pesos. That's why we will going to recognize an impairment loss of 30,000 pesos. That's the end of our lecture video. Thank you all for watching. Bye.